Then shall the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing.
In April, in Fredericton, they were having a special series, and my older sister and her husband lost a child in the fall, and so they became very interested in religion. And so, anyway, Bruce persuaded Earl to go to Fredericton to this meeting because they were taking me back up to my aunt's place. It was a Sunday night, and so Earl wasn't going to go. He wasn't going to go, but finally he did.
And he come in to see me, and he said, you know, we're taking Alvena back to Fredericton this weekend. We'd like you to come and come to these meetings with us. And I had absolutely no intention of going with any religious meetings. And so I swore at him and told him, get out of here, don't mention that that meetings to me. And so anyway, after he left, I got thinking about it. And I purposed in my mind that I would be a bum on the street before I would ever go to a religious meeting and give my heart to the Lord. Sunday morning, he come to see me again. He said, listen, I know, he said, you don't want to go to that meeting, but Alvena would like really you come up with a drive with us, and you can just stay out in the car with us. You don't have to go in the meeting. Why don't you come up for the drive? Just to come up, if we go up with her for the drive, and she would really like that. Anyway, so I finally said, yes, I'll go with you. But you really need to tell about praying for me.
Oh, I had written to the General Conference, I had written to the Review and Herald. Anybody who had any kind of a prayer band, I had written to them and asked them to pray that he would give his heart to the Lord. So all this was going on in the background, and he didn't know anything about it.
And anyway, we got to Fredericton, and it was cold. Actually too cold to stay in the car. So I decided, okay, I'll go in. So I went into the meeting, and I sat there, and the minister had a sermon on the unpardonable sin. And that hit me like a bolt of lightning. And he had an altar call afterwards, and I was on my feet. I was the first one to the front of that church. And when I look back on it, I have no idea what happened, but it happened.
When he stood up to go to the front of the church, I was in shock. It just didn't seem like it was real. It was just absolutely amazing. And he did such a turnaround in his life. I mean, he became a different person.
And so, anyway, I can remember we come outside the church that night, and I went back to the church and I threw those cigarettes away. And needless to say, it's a battle to quit smoking and quit drinking. The fellow that I used to drink with, him and I sometimes would stay a week in a hotel in St. John drinking. And later on, after I became an Adventist, I went into, one of the first things I did, I went into the woods where he was working, and I can still remember, I sat down on a stump and he sat down on another stump, and I started to tell him about the Lord. And he said, you know, Earl, we've been friends for years. If you ever mention that again to me, I will never in my life ever speak to you. I don't want to hear absolutely nothing about that stuff. And you know, when I look back on that, his name was Edgar. You know, when he died, I guess he died probably in his 60s. But you know, he never owned a car in his life. He never owned a bicycle in his life. He never owned a suit in his life. The only thing he ever owned was the clothes on his back and another couple of pair of blue jeans and another jacket and a chainsaw. He drank everything that he did, and it used to break my heart about that situation, because him and I were really good friends. But it just shows how the devil can get you, and he's got you. So she grew up with a drunken father.
Yeah.
And she would not want to see our kids brought up with a drunken father, I'm sure. So it would only have been a short time before we would have broken up, there's no doubt about it. Because I didn't care. You know, I didn't make it. One thing, I made sure that we had food on the table. But as far as drinking, I mean, I would drink all the money I had, be drunk, and she was pretty good to me, though. I come home, big head in the middle of the night or early in the morning or whatever it might be, and she always used me good. I remember getting out of bed in the morning one time, my head was big, and I didn't have any smokes, and I had to get out and get an ashtray and get all the cigarette butts out, get to split those cigarettes, go up the road to the bootleggers and get some booze so I could get over my big head again. But you know what a life that was. But when I look back, she's a good woman. Put up with that foolishness, but she couldn't do nothing. Back then, a woman's hands were tied. What are they going to do? I mean, now today you can go and get whatever from the government to keep you going if you have a problem like that. Back then there was nothing. And she was smart that she went and got her teacher.
I always wanted to be a teacher, but we got married right after I got out of high school, so you know that went by the board. And we had 2 little girls, and then I had a miscarriage, and I got infection. And I realized it had not been for modern medicine, I would have died. And anyway, that was in July, and I went to camp meeting the end of July, 1st of August, and I decided to be rebaptized then. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. When I got back home, He impressed me that I should go to Teachers College. It was only a 1-year program, and so it just was an overwhelming message in my mind. And so I prayed, Lord, if somebody else mentions this to me today, then I'll know it's your will. So we live close to where my mother lives, and so I took the girls and went over to her place in the afternoon, like I very often did. And didn't she say to me, you really should go to Teachers College? Well, I wasn't satisfied with that. So I went home and I prayed that if Earl would agree before we went to sleep that night, that the Lord really wanted me to go. And He did.
That was a miracle in itself.
It was, yeah.
So I went to work at the school part-time for that year, and then that maintenance man left. And so they asked me if I would take over, and so I took over the maintenance department there, and so I was there for 31 years after that. And it was an awesome time working with young people. Absolutely awesome. I have some of the best friends that I have in this world are some of those kids who work for me.
And they still keep contact with you.
And they still keep in contact. And one fellow, he phoned me twice now from Texas this summer in the middle of the day because he was doing whatever, and thanking me for what I had taught him. And it's a doctor from Georgia who said when he comes, he's telling me about him's going to fix the sink. And his wife said, how do you know how to fix the sink? And he said, oh, Mr. Dunhill taught me how to do that. One fellow told me one time, he said, the main thing I remember about you, Mr. Dunhill, I come in one time from the maintenance shop and you was on your knees praying with a student because he'd been smoking. you know. And so you wonder in your lifetime, you know, if you've helped anybody or not. But I've had many, many, many students come back and told me what a help that I had been to them. And one professor, he told me, he said, you don't know how many times I used you, not your name, but I used you in my classes when I'm talking to the other students. And so I'm blessed that I have looked back and realized that I did be a help to some people. And I might have went the other way. Did. So when I look back on life and how God has led me from where I was to where I am today, and the whole thing, all those years has been a growing situation, because actually when I gave my heart to the Lord the second time, I still didn't know Jesus. Indoctrination I knew, but of course salvation is a step by step. And so when I look back on my life, even if I look back 20 years ago, I can see how I keep climbing. And that's the reason that I say that if there's nothing to be scared for the future unless we forget how God has led us in the past. Unless you pray, and unless you
Study.
and unless you make sure you go to church regularly, the devil has many ways and means of getting us.
It is really important that we gather with fellow believers. You know, because when you stop, well then things start to cool down and you don't study as much, and I mean you don't hear the sermons.
But also it's important that you mingle with non-Adventists as well.